Have you ever wondered how a simple swipe right could lead to a night of terror? In the boundless world of online dating, a young woman named Lilly found herself drawn to a man with an irresistible charm. His name was Ethan. His profile was a tapestry of adventure and sophistication, his smile as captivating as a summer sunset. As she scrolled through the messages they exchanged, Lilly felt an undeniable connection. Ethan was a master of his craft, weaving words into a symphony of intrigue and allure. Every conversation was a dance, their words swirling, twirling, drawing them closer. His charm was magnetic, his wit sharp, and his compliments, though plentiful, never felt insincere. Each message Lilly received was like a carefully wrapped gift, filled with promises of laughter, comfort, and companionship. The digital realm was their stage, and they danced to the rhythm of their words, lost in a world of their own. The decision to meet was as natural as the changing of seasons. Ethan suggested a quaint little cafe, nestled in the heart of the city. It was the perfect place to transition their digital connection into reality. The thought of seeing Ethan in person filled Lilly with a mix of excitement and nervousness. She spent hours deciding on the perfect outfit, rehearsing conversations in her mind, and imagining the look on Ethan's face when he saw her. Yet, beneath the anticipation, there was a whisper of unease. It was like a shadow in the corner of her eye, elusive yet persistent. But Lilly shrugged it off, attributing it to first date jitters. She was about to meet the man who had charmed her through her screen. She was about to step into a new chapter of her life, a chapter filled with promise and potential. Little did she know, this was a date she would never forget. As she stepped into the bustling cafe, her heart pounded with anticipation. The aroma of freshly ground coffee and the hum of conversation swirled around her, a comforting backdrop to the uncertainty she felt. She spotted him across the room, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that was both thrilling and unsettling. He was just as charming in person as he had been online, his smile warm and inviting. But there was something a little off about his demeanor, a certain edge to his laughter that seemed forced, his gaze a touch too unyielding. His comments, too, were odd, veering into the inappropriate at times, leaving her feeling slightly disconcerted. He talked about strange things like how isolated this cafe was despite its popularity, how easy it would be to get lost in the crowd. She tried to brush it off as nervous chatter, but a growing unease began to settle in the pit of her stomach. His hand brushed against hers, a touch too lingering, making her skin crawl. He laughed off her discomfort, making light of it in a way that left her feeling foolish. She tried to shake off her fears, telling herself she was overreacting. But the more she tried to rationalize his behavior, the more her intuition screamed that something wasn't right. The conversation took a turn for the worse when he began to press her about her personal life, his questions growing more intrusive. She felt cornered, his eyes boring into hers with an intensity that felt alarming. Despite the buzz of the cafe, she felt isolated, trapped in an invisible web he seemed to be weaving around her. She attempted to steer the conversation back to safer grounds, but he seemed relentless, his eagerness to know her becoming more like a demand than a request. His laughter rang hollow in her ears, his charm fading to reveal something far more sinister. But when he leaned in for a kiss, she knew she had to escape. The realization hit her like a cold wave, a chilling certainty that she was in danger. She had walked into a nightmare, and now she needed to find a way out. Cornered and scared, she saw only one way out: the balcony. That was her only lifeline in this high-rise prison. The cold, concrete balcony seemed to offer a glimmer of hope, a terrifying yet hopeful path to freedom. Her heart pounded in her chest, echoing the intensity of the situation. Her breath hitched as she looked over the edge, the city lights twinkling in a cruel mockery of her dire predicament. She was in a towering skyscraper, a monolith of steel and glass that pierced the night sky. This was no ordinary climb. It was a perilous descent from a dizzying height, a journey that could end in a fatal plunge. The distance between safety and danger was terrifying. The wind howled around her, whipping her hair into her face, threatening to push her over the edge. She clung onto the railings, her knuckles turning white with the strain. One slip, one false move, and she would be plummeting towards the unforgiving concrete below. Her fear was palpable. a living, breathing entity that wrapped its icy fingers around her heart. But more than that, it was a powerful motivator. She was driven by a primal instinct, a desperate need to survive. Each downward movement was a testament to her will, her determination to escape the nightmare that had ensnared her. She maneuvered her way down, her body shaking from the effort. Every inch she descended was a victory, a step towards freedom. Her strength was waning, but she pressed on. She could hear his footsteps above, his angry shouts echoing in the night. But she didn't look back. She couldn't afford to. As she neared the ground, her heart leapt with hope. She was almost there. Her fingers grazed the last railing, her feet finding solid ground. A sigh of relief escaped her lips, her body sagging with exhaustion. But as she reached the ground, she thought she was safe. But he was waiting. His silhouette loomed in the darkness, a menacing figure that made her blood run cold. Her escape, her daring climb, it had all been in vain. Or had it? The next chapter was yet to unfold. The terrifying escape was over, but the ordeal was far from done. He stood there in the shadows, watching her every move. As she descended the towering high-rise, the man who had turned her evening into a nightmare was waiting at the bottom. The chilling wind whipped at her hair and clothes, adding to the palpable sense of dread. Yet despite the terror coursing through her veins, she pressed on, clinging to the sheer will to survive. Each foothold she found seemed to be a small victory, a minor triumph against the imposing structure she was scaling down. Her heart pounded in her chest like a drum, echoing the ticking seconds that separated her from potential freedom or a dreadful end. As she neared the bottom, she saw him. His silhouette was a stark contrast against the dimly lit street, a stark reminder of the danger that still lurked. She was out of the frying pan, but the fire was far from extinguished. Yet she was not ready to surrender. She was not ready to become another statistic, another victim. She had come too far to give up now. She hit the ground running, her adrenaline pumping as her feet pounded the pavement. She darted around him, a flash of determination in the dark. Her heart pounded louder than ever before, and her breath came out in quick, desperate gasps. She needed to find help. She needed to survive. And then she saw it, the glimmering beacon of hope in the form of a police car patrolling the area. She waved frantically, her voice hoarse from the cold and fear, but strong enough to grab their attention. The car came to a screeching halt, and out stepped two officers, their faces etched with concern. She rushed to them, her words tumbling out in a hurried mess as she explained her ordeal. She pointed to where the man had been standing, the ominous figure that had been her tormentor. But when she turned around to point him out, he had vanished. Her heart sank. The street was empty, save for the flickering streetlights and the parked police car. There was no sign of the man, no trace of the terror that had unfolded that night. It was as if he had evaporated into the night, leaving behind only the chilling memory of his presence. The officers, though puzzled, decided to investigate further. They followed her up to the apartment, their stern faces reflecting the gravity of the situation. But what they found was even more baffling. There was no trace of the man. Instead, a family was living there, completely oblivious to the terror that had unfolded just hours before. Children played innocently in the same room where she had feared for her life. The unexpected twist left her reeling. The man, the apartment, the terrifying encounter, it was as if they had never existed. Yet the lingering fear was a stark reminder of the terrifying reality she had escaped. But when she turned around to point him out, he had vanished. The chilling echo of his absence was a haunting end to a night she would never forget. With the police by her side, she felt safe enough to return to the apartment. A sense of dread loomed over her as they ascended the high-rise, the eeriness of the previous encounter still fresh in her mind. The elevator ride was silent, a stark contrast to the frantic escape she had made just moments ago. As they reached the designated floor, she led the officers to the apartment, her heart pounding in her chest. The door opened with a creak, revealing a scene that felt like it was ripped straight from a different reality. A family sat in the living room, engrossed in their evening routine. Children's laughter filled the air, a jarring juxtaposition to the fear that had dominated the space earlier. The shock washed over her like a wave, the confusion following closely behind. This wasn't the grim setting she had fled from. There was no trace of the man who had instilled such fear in her. The apartment was now filled with the warmth of family life, the walls adorned with family portraits and children's drawings, not the cold, sterile environment she had experienced before. The police officers exchanged puzzled glances, their brows furrowed in confusion. They questioned the family, who insisted they had been home all evening. The woman, in her bewilderment, described the man, his actions, and the terror she had felt. But the family had seen no such person, and the officers could find no evidence of the man's presence. In a daze, she walked around the apartment, her eyes scanning the familiar yet alien surroundings. Every corner, every piece of furniture was the same, yet everything felt different. The room was devoid of the menacing aura that had once filled it. It was as though she had stepped into an alternate universe where the traumatic events of the night had never occurred. In the exact same room where she had been just minutes ago, there was no trace of the man. The man, the fear, the danger, all had vanished, leaving behind a mystery that would haunt her for years to come. As the reality of the situation sunk in, she was left with more questions than answers. In the aftermath of this chilling encounter, the girl was left traumatized, her mind teeming with questions that seemed to have no answers. The prospect of a charming stranger she'd met online turning into a phantom of terror had shattered her sense of safety, leaving her in a perpetual state of fear and anxiety. The police were just as baffled as she was. Despite their best efforts, they could not find any trace of the man. No digital footprints, no physical evidence, no leads. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. The high-rise apartment where the terrifying events had unfolded was now home to an unsuspecting family. There was no sign that the man had ever been there. The police were left scratching their heads, grappling with a case that seemed to defy logic. The girl, meanwhile, was fighting her own battle. Every time she closed her eyes, she would relive the terror of that night. The eerie comments, the forceful advances, the desperate escape. It all played out in her mind like a grotesque movie. She was left wondering if she'd ever feel safe again. The world, once full of promise, now seemed a dark and dangerous place. Even more tormenting were the questions that hung in the air, unanswered. Who was this man? Why did he do what he did? How did he disappear without a trace? And perhaps the most haunting question of all, was he still out there lurking in the shadows, waiting for his next victim? These questions gnawed at her, keeping her up at night. She found herself constantly looking over her shoulder, jumping at the slightest sounds. She felt like a prisoner in her own home, trapped by the fear of the unknown. The mystery of what happened that night continued to baffle everyone involved. The police were still searching, hoping to find some clue that could lead them to the man. The girl, on the other hand, was trying to pick up the pieces of her life, hoping to find some semblance of normalcy. But the questions remained, hanging in the air like a thick fog. The mystery of the man's identity, his motives, his disappearance, and his whereabouts continued to confound. It was a puzzle that seemed to have no solution, a story with no ending. So what happened to the man? That, dear listener, is a question that remains unanswered.